In this very brief demo, I just want to share with you how we actually control or establish the distance of the artwork from the top of the page when we're working with scroll effects, because it can be confusing. It can seem to situate itself in an unpredictable area, but I'll show you exactly how you can predict it and set it. Let me just show you one that's a little bit finished here. I do have a scroll effect on this artwork, JPEG graphic, where I've locked it in place. You can see here under my initial motion, all my settings are set to 0 except for the trigger, which is at 177 pixels from the top of the page. Now let me go over quickly again to the opacity settings. Again, the trigger is common between all of the effects, and you can see here that I do start invisible, and then as I scroll down to the 177th pixel, it ultimately becomes opaque and then remains opaque after I pass the trigger point. So we'll quickly take a look at that under preview. So I scroll down and it's locked in place as I said, and it appears. Now what's a little bit maybe weird here is look at where it sits from the top of the page. Right now it seems the artwork, I'll tell you right now, the artwork boundary box is actually in line with the top of the page. Okay, but when we go to design view, you know, it's like whatever, it's looks like 177 pixels from the top, so it's a little weird. Here is the simple fact on how to determine that distance. The trigger, which is a little hard to see here, but it's this line. Oh, let me undo that. It's this line here, the trigger, and you can see it changing over here. It's the distance between that trigger and the top of the artwork. Let me just exaggerate this. Now, I would have to probably scroll up here into my artwork, and if I can't access it, I'd actually have to drag the artwork down, which ironically and strangely will not change the location on the page when we're using a scroll effect. The reason I did that is I want to access this initial point and just bring it in tighter. Now if I want to bring this up farther again, I can, but the reality of the situation is that this artwork ultimately, when it reaches the trigger, will be the distance from the trigger to the top of the artwork. Actually, that distance is established from the get-go. And from here to here is the duration that it will take to transition from invisible to opaque. But again, the important part is the distance from the trigger to the artwork ultimately establishes where it sits on the page. So I can assume that this distance from here to here is where it will sit from the top. So let's just quickly preview that. And as it comes into opacity, as it comes into existence here, you can see that distance is established. So let me just shorten it again. I'll bring the trigger down basically flush with the top of the artwork, which means the top of the artwork will now be flush with the top of the page. Okay, so that's probably the most confusing part about working with the scroll effects and the artwork as it's situated on the page. Now I'll just exaggerate this one more time. I keep grabbing the wrong handle there. It's a little tricky and close. And you know what I can do here is I can actually use the little arrows inside of my scroll effects panel, and then if I want to grab it after that, I can. So we'll just shorten this. Maybe I'll bring this down a bit further. All I'm doing here is giving it a lower spot on the page by increasing the distance from the trigger, the key position, to the top of the artwork. So now you should see it appearing even farther down the page. There we go. Okay, so the distance between the trigger and the top of the art does determine where it sits from the top of the browser inside of the web page. Okay, so I'll just sort of normalize that again. And doing this is rather irrelevant with respect to locating it on the page. What's important is the relationship between the triggers and the top of the artwork. So now, actually I'll just bring it flush again. Now we'll appear basically at the top of the page. And the duration for that transition going from 0 to 100 determined by this first setting will be determined by this number of pixels across the scroll. Currently right now this point here makes no difference in what we experience as an effect because we are already at 100 and we transition to 100, which means there's no actual change. Okay, so let's just preview this one more time. And there it is at the top of the page. So that, again, is how we deal with locating the artwork on the page when we are working within the scroll effects.